"Is this the best you have?" The question came with a thick German accent. It was full of meanness and disrespect. It echoed across the concrete and grass of the Fort Bragg long-distance shooting range. Klaus was a young German sniper. He was very confident. Too confident. He smirked at his partner, Richter. They were part of a visiting German KSK sniper team. They were here for a joint training exercise with American soldiers. And right now, they were thoroughly unimpressed. Their target wasn't a paper silhouette or a steel plate. It was an old man. Dennis Randall was 82 years old. He sat on a simple wooden stool. His back was straight. His breathing was even and calm. He didn't seem to hear the German snipers making fun of him. His attention was on the rifle resting across his lap. It was a weapon that looked very old compared to the shiny new rifles around him. It was a bolt-action rifle. Its wooden stock was worn smooth and dark from many years of use. The metal had faded from blue to a soft gray color. "Look at that old relic," Richter whispered, but he said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "It belongs in a museum, not on a 1,000-meter shooting line, perhaps with him." Dennis ran a soft cloth along the barrel of his rifle. His hands were wrinkled. You could see the veins through his skin, but his hands were steady, very steady. He moved slowly and carefully. It wasn't because he was weak. It was because he had deep patience, the kind that comes from a lifetime of experience. The range officer was a young lieutenant named Hayes. He shifted uncomfortably. He was caught in a difficult position. On one side, he had high-profile international guests, the German snipers. On the other side, he had this quiet old man who came to the range every Tuesday. Dennis would fire 5 rounds, clean his weapon carefully, and leave. He never bothered anyone. "Gentlemen, let's maintain professional behavior," Hayes said. But his voice didn't sound very confident. The Germans were celebrated marksmen, some of the best shooters in the world. The old man was just an old man. At least that's what everyone thought. Klaus stepped closer to Dennis. He looked down at him. "Old man, do you need help? Perhaps your eyes are not so good anymore. This is a serious range for serious soldiers." He pointed at his own rifle. It was a piece of advanced German engineering. It probably cost more than a new car. "This is a tool of precision. What you have there is just a piece of firewood." Dennis finally looked up. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, but they held a clarity that was almost unnerving. They weren't angry. They weren't offended. They were simply watching, observing, taking in the young sniper's posture, his expensive watch, the casual cruelty in his smile. Dennis said nothing. The silence was more frustrating to Klaus than any response could have been. He felt the need to fill it, to assert his dominance, to prove he was better. "I will make a wager," Klaus announced to everyone watching. "I will hit the hostage-taker target at 100 meters, a headshot through the eye." He puffed out his chest proudly. "If I do it, the old man packs up his toy and never returns. If I miss," he laughed, "I will not miss." Richter joined in the challenge. "And if he can even hit the target, just the steel plate from that distance with that old thing," he said, flicking a dismissive finger toward Dennis's rifle, "we will clean every weapon on this line." The challenge hung in the air. It was sharp and ugly, mean-spirited. The small crowd of soldiers murmured to each other. This was a setup, a public humiliation. The hostage-taker target was a special reactive plate. The head of the hostile silhouette was barely the size of an orange. Hitting it at that range was a difficult feat even for a world-class sniper, with a modern rifle and a spotter helping them. For an old man with an ancient rifle and no spotter, it seemed impossible. Lieutenant Hayes looked at Dennis. His expression was a mixture of pity and impatience. "Sir, maybe it's best if you just call it a day. These gentlemen are our guests." Dennis slowly, methodically finished wiping down his rifle. He laid the cloth aside. His movements were unhurried, calm. The German snipers exchanged a look of triumphant mockery. They thought they had won. The old man was going to retreat. He was going to shuffle away in quiet defeat. But Dennis didn't pack up. He picked up a single cartridge from a small worn leather pouch. The brass casing was tarnished with age. He slid it into the chamber. The click of the bolt closing echoed in the tense quiet. Then he looked at Lieutenant Hayes. His pale blue eyes held the young officer's gaze. "I've been waiting for the wind to settle," Dennis said. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp. It was the first time he had spoken. It's almost there. The pure confidence in his tone shifted the atmosphere. It wasn't boastful. It was a simple statement of fact. Like a farmer commenting on the weather, Klaus's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. This wasn't the reaction he expected. He expected fear, embarrassment, retreat. He didn't expect readiness. "The wind?" Richter scoffed, recovering his composure. "What do you know of the wind, old man? My equipment gives me precise readings. Do you even know what that means?" Dennis didn't answer. He was running his thumb over the stock of his rifle, over a set of initials roughly carved into the wood. LTB. The pressure from Klaus and Richter intensified. They saw his silence not as patience, but as fear or confusion. "So, you will not shoot? You are afraid to be shown up?" Klaus goaded. His voice was rising. "This is a place for warriors, not for grandfathers telling stories." He turned to the other soldiers watching. "In my country, we respect our elders, but we also expect them to know their place. His place is not here." The insult was direct, a deliberate attempt to strip Dennis of his dignity. The onlookers shifted uncomfortably. Their amusement was turning to discomfort. A line had been crossed. This wasn't sport anymore. It was bullying. "Lieutenant," Richter said, his tone sharp and official, "this man is a civilian. He is not part of this exercise. He is becoming a distraction and, frankly, a safety concern. His equipment is not up to standard. I must insist you remove him from the firing line." Hayes, feeling overwhelmed and intimidated, nodded reluctantly. "Sir, I have to ask you to leave the line. You can't fire today." He took a step toward Dennis, his hand outstretched as if to take the rifle. "Please, sir, don't make this difficult." Dennis's thumb stopped moving over the initials on the stock. His gaze became distant for just a fleeting second. In his mind, the bright sun-bleached range dissolved. He was in a thick jungle, choking with humidity and the smell of rot and fear. He was much younger. A boy, barely 20 years old, was handing him the rifle. The initials were freshly carved. The wood was still pale. "Take care of her, Denny," the boy, Larry Thomas Bell, said. His voice was strained with fear. "She's a straight shooter." Gunfire rattled in the distance, a sound that had become the constant background of their lives. "When we get out of this place, I'm going to buy a farm," Larry said. There was desperate hope in his eyes. Dennis just nodded. His own fear was a cold knot in his stomach. The rifle felt heavy in his hands, not just with its own weight, but with the weight of a promise to bring it and its owner home safely. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, a flash of lightning in a clear sky. Dennis's eyes refocused on Lieutenant Hayes's outstretched hand. He didn't move. He didn't give in. He simply sat there, solid as a rock. On the far edge of the gathering crowd, a young specialist named Garcia had seen enough. He'd been watching the whole thing unfold. His jaw was tight with anger at every insult. He knew Dennis. The old man never bothered anyone. He'd even given Garcia some shooting tips a month ago. Simple advice about breathing and trigger control that had improved Garcia's accuracy more than a week of formal training. Disrespecting an old man was bad. Disrespecting a fellow shooter was worse. But disrespecting this particular old man felt wrong in a deep way Garcia couldn't quite explain. Garcia slipped his phone from his pocket, keeping it low so others wouldn't see. He stepped back away from the firing line. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. He pulled up a number from his contacts, a number he was only supposed to use in a real emergency. He looked back at the scene. The Germans were posturing. The lieutenant was failing to handle the situation. And Dennis was sitting there, silently enduring the humiliation. This felt like an emergency. He pressed the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. "Operations desk, Sergeant Miller." A crisp voice answered. "Sergeant, this is Specialist Garcia at the long-distance range," he said. His voice was low and urgent. "You need to get someone down here right now." "What's the situation, Specialist? Is there an injury?" "No, Sergeant," Garcia said, turning his back to shield his words. They're disrespecting a civilian. Some visiting KSK guys are giving an old man a hard time." There was a pause, followed by an audible sigh of annoyance. "Garcia, this line is for operational emergencies, not for settling range squabbles. Tell the range officer to handle it." "He can't. He's letting them walk all over him," Garcia insisted. His voice rose with frustration. Listen, Sergeant. The man they're harassing, it's Mr. Randall, Dennis Randall. The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't annoyance. It was a sharp, sudden intake of breath. The air itself seemed to go still. Say that name again, Specialist, Sergeant Miller said. His voice was stripped of all previous boredom. Now it was flat and cold as steel. Randall, Garcia repeated. Dennis Randall. The phone line was quiet for 3 full seconds. Garcia could hear faint, frantic clicking of a keyboard in the background. Then Miller's voice came back. It was a completely different voice. It was tight, controlled, and ringing with alarm. Specialist Garcia, what is your exact location? Range 7, sir. The 1,000-meter line. Do not engage. Do not interfere, Miller commanded. Keep your eyes on Mr. Randall. Stay on this line. Do not hang up. I am handing this upstairs right now. Garcia didn't have to ask who upstairs was. He could already hear muffled but urgent shouting in the background on Miller's end. Inside a secure building far from the range, Colonel Marcus Thorne was ending a video conference when his operations sergeant burst into the room without knocking. This was so against protocol that it made Thorne's blood run cold. Sir, we have a Spectre 1 situation. Thorne was out of his chair before the sergeant finished the sentence. Spectre 1 was a ghost name, a legend whispered in hushed tones in the unit's private history. It wasn't a call sign currently in use. It was an original designation from the very founding of Delta Force, before it was even officially named. There was only one man who had ever held that call sign and was still alive. Where? Thorne demanded. His voice was a low growl. Range 7, sir. Civilian side. He's in a confrontation with the visiting KSK team. Thorne swore, a single sharp word. He grabbed a red phone on his desk, the direct line to the base commander. Get me General Peters. I don't care if he's in a meeting. Get him now, and scramble the QRF team. Now, Sergeant, tell them it's a Spectre 1 authorization, full kit. Go. The sergeant disappeared. Thorne listened to the phone connect. This is Colonel Thorne. I am executing a command override. I need a full lockdown on all access roads to Range 7. Nothing in or out until my team arrives. And get the German liaison officer on the line. Tell him his men are in the process of committing a career-ending international incident. He didn't wait for a reply. He slammed the phone down and was already moving, grabbing his sidearm and heading for the door. The entire command center, a place that usually ran on quiet, deadly efficiency, was now controlled chaos. All because of one name, Dennis Randall. Back at Range 7, Klaus and Richter were enjoying what they thought was their victory. Dennis hadn't moved. Lieutenant Hayes was about to physically escort him away. Sir, for the last time, you need to leave, Hayes said. His voice was strained. Take your shot, old man, Klaus said with a final gesture of mockery. Show us what you have before you go. Show us the great skill of the American grandfather. He turned and winked at Richter. This was the final humiliation, forcing Dennis to fail in front of everyone before being thrown out. Klaus was relishing the moment. He was an elite sniper of the KSK, and he was putting a foolish old man in his place. He was certain this was the right thing to do. He had never been more wrong in his entire life. The first sound was a distant siren. That was odd. There was no emergency. Then another siren joined it. Then, over the rise of the dirt access road, a cloud of dust appeared. It wasn't a single vehicle. It was a convoy. 3 black armored Suburbans came racing toward the range. They were moving at a speed that was both reckless and perfectly controlled. They didn't slow as they approached. They fanned out in a practice formation, coming to a hard stop that sent gravel scattering. The doors flew open simultaneously. Men poured out. They were not in standard army uniforms. They were dressed in tactical gear. Their faces were grim. Their weapons were held at the ready. They moved with fluid, controlled movements that made every other soldier on the range look clumsy by comparison. Delta Force, the elite unit. The air crackled with their sudden, overwhelming presence. The entire range fell dead silent. The German snipers froze, their mouths slightly open. Lieutenant Hayes looked like he'd seen a ghost. A man in a crisp uniform emerged from the lead vehicle. He had a full bird colonel insignia on his collar. He was tall and imposing, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He strode onto the range, his boots crunching on gravel. His gaze swept past the Germans, past the lieutenant, past everyone, until it landed on the old man sitting on the stool. Colonel Thorne walked directly to Dennis Randall. He stopped 3 feet in front of him. His posture was perfectly straight. In the stunned silence, he brought his hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. "Spectre 1, the colonel said. His voice was clear and rang with profound respect that bordered on reverence. "Sir, Colonel Thorne, we were informed there was a disturbance." Dennis looked up at him and gave a slow, tired nod. "Just some boys being boys, Marcus. A little loud is all." Thorne held the salute for a moment longer before dropping his hand. He turned and his gaze, now ice cold, fell upon Klaus and Richter. They flinched as if physically struck. "You are the KSK liaison team?" Thorne asked. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Richter managed to stammer, Yes, Colonel." Thorne took a slow step toward them. His men fanned out around the area, silent sentinels. "Then you will stand here and you will listen," he said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "You stand on the soil of the United States Army as our guests, and on this soil, you have chosen to publicly mock a living legend. A founding father of modern special operations." He pointed at Dennis. "This is Dennis Randall, call sign Spectre 1, one of the first 7 men recruited into the organization you now know as Delta Force. He served in 3 wars, 2 of which you will never read about in any history book. He has more confirmed long-range engagements than your entire unit combined." The crowd was utterly silent. Every person was hanging on every word. Specialist Garcia, still on the phone, felt a wave of vindication. Lieutenant Hayes's face had gone chalk white. Klaus and Richter looked like they were about to be physically ill. Their arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. They weren't mocking some random old man. They were mocking a legend, the origin of their own craft. "The rifle you so casually dismissed as firewood," Thorne continued, his voice relentless, "was used on a mission in 1968 to eliminate 3 high-value targets at over 1,200 yards in a monsoon with no spotter. That action saved an entire Green Beret team from being overrun, an action for which he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross." He paused, letting that sink in. "The techniques your instructors teach you, the formulas for windage and elevation, the very theory of coordinated sniper spotter teams, he helped write those manuals. He tested those theories with his own experience in places that don't exist on any map. He has forgotten more about marksmanship than you will ever have the privilege to learn. You are not fit to carry his ammunition, let alone speak to him." Thorne finally stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of history and shame. The colonel turned back to Dennis. His entire manner softened. "Sir," he said, "the range is yours. Is there anything you require?" Dennis looked down at the single cartridge he had loaded into his rifle. Then he looked up, past the Germans, past the targets, to the distant horizon. "No, Marcus. I think I'm ready for my shot now." Colonel Thorne turned to the cowering Lieutenant Hayes. "Range officer, is this man's shot authorized?" Hayes, snapping out of his shock, practically shouted, "Yes, sir. The line is clear. The line is hot. Mr. Randall is authorized to fire." The colonel then turned to the German snipers. His voice was no longer angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. "Respect," he said, "is not a function of age or equipment. It is a function of character. It is the currency of a true warrior. Today you have proven yourselves bankrupt." He gestured for 2 of his men to escort them away. As they were being led away, their faces showing utter humiliation, Dennis finally spoke. Not to them, but to the air itself. A lesson for anyone who cared to listen. "Pride is a poor spotter," he said quietly. His voice carried across the silent range. "It will make you miss the target every time." He then settled himself behind the rifle. The worn wooden stock fit into his shoulder like a long-lost part of him. As he looked through the old simple scope, his mind flashed back one last time. Not to the jungle, but to a different day. Larry Thomas Bell wasn't dead. He was on a stretcher, pale and injured. One leg gone below the knee. But he was alive. He was going home. "You keep it, Denny," Larry had whispered, pressing the rifle into Dennis's hands. "You're better with it than I ever was. Make it count." It wasn't a gift. It was a transfer of responsibility, a passing of a torch. Make it count. And he had. For 50 years he had. Dennis took a slow breath, held it. The world narrowed to the small circle of his scope and the impossibly distant target. The crosshairs settled. There was no tremor, no hesitation. There was only a lifetime of practice, of discipline, of promises kept. He gently squeezed the trigger. The crack of the old rifle was sharp, distinct. It was the sound of history speaking. For a second, nothing happened. Then, 100 meters away, over 2/3 of a mile, the tiny orange circle representing the hostile's head vanished. The high-pitched ping of lead-hitting hardened steel echoed back across the range. A perfect shot, perfect punctuation mark. In the weeks that followed, the incident at Range 7 became a quiet legend on the base. The two KSK snipers were sent home, their tour cut short. A formal apology was delivered from the German Ministry of Defense. General Peters himself issued a new base-wide mandate, a mandatory training block for all incoming personnel, titled the Randall Rule. It focused on the legacy and respectful treatment of military veterans, regardless of their age or apparent status. Lieutenant Hayes was reassigned to a desk job, a quiet but unmistakable end to his command aspirations. One rainy Tuesday morning, about a month later, Dennis was sitting in a small off-base diner, drinking a cup of coffee. The bell over the door chimed. In walked Richter, the younger of the two German snipers. He was in civilian clothes, looking tired and much younger without his uniform. He saw Dennis, hesitated, then walked slowly to the table. He stood there for a moment, shifting his weight, clearly struggling for words. Finally, he just said, "Mr. Randall." Dennis looked up from his coffee and nodded. "I was not sent here," Richter said. His English was careful and formal. "My flight home is tomorrow. I wish to apologize for my conduct. There is no excuse. It was arrogant and it was shameful." He looked down at his feet. "What Colonel Thorne said, we had no idea." "That's the point," Dennis said. His voice was gentle. "You're not supposed to have an idea. You're just supposed to have respect." Richter met his gaze. For the first time, Dennis saw not a soldier, but a young man who had learned a hard, painful lesson. "Yes, sir. I understand that now." He stood in silence for another moment, then placed a small folded piece of paper on the table. "I researched the name on your rifle, Larry Thomas Bell. I read about his service after he was wounded. He became a teacher. He passed away 2 years ago." Dennis looked at the paper, then back at the young man. He gave a slow, sad smile. "He was a good man, better than me." "Thank you for the lesson, Mr. Randall," Richter said. He gave a slight, formal bow, turned and walked out of the diner back into the rain. Dennis watched him go, then picked up his coffee cup. His steady hands were a testament to a life of quiet, unassuming valor. The lesson was simple but profound. Legends don't always announce themselves. Heroes often look like ordinary people. Respect should be given freely, not earned through displays of superiority. And the greatest warriors are often the quietest ones, the ones who have nothing left to prove. Dennis Randall continued his Tuesday routine. Every week he would go to the range, fire 5 careful shots, clean his rifle with the same worn cloth, and leave quietly. But now when he arrived, young soldiers would stand a little straighter. They would nod respectfully. They would remember the lesson of Spectre 1. That true strength doesn't need to be loud. That experience should be honored. That an old rifle in steady hands can still speak with authority. And that sometimes the most important shot you take is the one that teaches others about respect, humility, and the weight of history. The heroes who walk among us often carry the heaviest stories with the quietest grace.